Welcome to Dweller of the Dark. We are a channel honoring the yellowed and blackened bones of many prominent authors. We will be digging up several obscure, strange, and forgotten authors who influenced many of the great horror, science fiction, and fantasy writers today. More tales of the horrifying, obscure, strange, and forgotten are climbing out of the tombs. Subscribe, comment, like, donate, or I'll send Thaddeus Forge to steal your heathen soul. Unknown horror masters, send us ghoulish delights for the Skull and Bones collection. Your pound of writer's flesh will continue to feed our ghouls for now. Books, websites, podcasts, in the links below. Children of Horror, Legion of Ghouls. Tonight, Hell's Forge, Chapter 4. Cauldron Mountain, outskirts of Pearl Ridge. Mary Forge's cabin. Wake of Ruby St. Clair, August 24th, 1922. Mary Forge looked up past the burning lamps of her house up to the shimmering stars hanging low on Cauldron Mountain. As she studied them, she heard the eerie baying of distant hounds, or maybe wolves. She was trying to make sense of it all. Some animal, because what this fiend did wasn't human, was still out there on the mountain. Families were panicked to send their daughters or children with such a brute in their midst. Many were questioning who could have done this. Others wanted the why. But in murder sometimes, people don't get what they want. Mary had an idea. A young man who all his miserable existence had gotten a pass for heinous things. His daddy had protected him every step of the way on fights, accidents, and missteps. If a girl was raped, the father would argue, would pay off the family for the transgression. Jesse Gordon, town entrepreneur, and his cronies would vehemently lie or deny. Take your pick. How many times had Mary cringed hearing, "There was no way Alistair could have done it, Sheriff Jones. He was with me." Now, after years of quiet abuse to the families of Cauldron Mountain, here they were. After years of bribing, bullying, and silencing anyone by any means necessary who would question the lurid creature called Alistair Gordon, the monster had grown bolder in its acts, and its, for that cretin again was no man. Realization that it was by all accounts untouchable. She knew the low-life Gordons would come. They couldn't resist feeding on the sorrowful moment of Ruby St. Clair. The way they all held their heads low and sullen gave Mary the image of ghouls readying to feast on a corpse and indulge gloriously in the family's pain as they watched. Mary would make damn sure they would for once be refused their indulgences. Yes, some dark premonition had whispered the sheriff would bring his masters, even before she and the local women had prepared Ruby for her funeral. As they had washed off the blood, scrubbed the clots out of her lifeless red curls, and wrapped her in her finest dress, the dread grew that the sycophants would come agloat. And as they made their final preparations of filling her coffin with lavender, magnolia, and sassafras, a young boy, Thomas Jones, yelled a wagon was coming up the mountain trail. An hour after the announcement, with the cold, chilling winds gusting a thick fog down off the mountain, Mary sat in her rocking chair. She rocked slowly, held her Sharps rifle tightly, and waited. It wouldn't be long now. As she waited, she could have sworn she heard whispers out in the swaying pines. It was followed by buzzing and swarming of something above the cabin. Some bug was hovering and landing on the roof. Wide-eyed in disbelief, she stopped rocking to peer in the star-gemmed sky making out the thick cloud of bugs. Narrowing her turquoise eyes, she stood to get a closer inspection of the whirring and winding insects as they continued to light the house. One landed on the porch, and Mary was surprised to witness the reddest locust she had ever seen in her life. As the insect made a strange whistling whir, it sat unbothered on the porch as Mary continued to raise the lamp and look upon it. The skin of the locust shimmered like the hot coals of a campfire. Its eyes were as the rings of blackest smoke. The wings glistened as sheens of gold. Its legs were as red pinions of a cardinal. She put the rifle down, amazed for a moment, to look closer at the insect. To the locust, she leaned in and spoke. "My word, I've seen every type of insect on Cauldron Mountain. I've never seen you here before. You are definitely something new." As she finished her words, some of the St. Clair family came out startled by all the buzzing on Mary's roof. As one of the women did so, the locust flew up to join the rest of its swarm. The women, immediately terrified, went back inside. Mary moved back to her chair and listened to the locust swarm and hum. After just 10 minutes, the swarm quieted with just the occasional eerie scratching of their wings. Mary went back to rocking her chair and waited for more unwanted guests. As an early evening mist rolled in around the cabin, the wagon and horses arrived. A tall, overweight man with a flowing silver beard moved in, his seat wincing. He held the reins of his 4-horse team in his left hand and nodded on Mary and the growing crowd out on the porch, there for the wake. From her vantage point on the porch, if it weren't certain before, it was certain now that Sheriff Johnson had indeed brought the heinous and despised Gordons, and he brought others as well. Their tag-along was that fool, Cletus Bartholomew, and one other whom she couldn't identify sitting in the back of the wagon. Mary stopped rocking her chair and remained still in the darkness on her porch. She sat, she waited, and she clutched her Sharp's rifle across her lap in case there was trouble. And with Jesse Gordon, Sheriff Lester Johnson, and his ilk, there was always trouble. The sheriff moved the procession a little closer to the cabin to tie up. Mary bared her teeth and seethed. "There's no need for that. You won't be staying long." The men on horse rode up with 2 horses alongside of the wagon. They gave icy nods to the sheriff and held their hands on tucked-away pistols. The sheriff shook his head no, and the men dropped their hands back to their sides. Mary heard the creaking and rattling Murphy wagon finally halt. Pulling to the front of the lantern and torch-lit house, the group all stopped their procession. Sheriff Johnson, as he pulled the reins to stop, had a confused look on his face. Mary figured he was trying to come up with the best lie to appease them. Mary looked on in disgust at the rebuked cavalcade. She studied the spineless minion of Jesse Gordon. Everyone on the mountain and in the town knew he was no law enforcer. He'd been hand-selected by Jesse for his unique skills of knowing when to keep his mouth shut and where to hide a body. At best, he was a paid gun of the Gordons, who would at the drop of a hat push a family off their land, disappear a man with a gold or lumber claim, or far worse if things went south for the devious Jesse Gordon. Then there were the average height, bulky, toad-like Gordons. Even sitting, Mary could see their jowls jiggling like jelly. Jesse's son, Alistair, kept his teeth clenched and stared out into the night. "I'll mind my manners, but them coming out here when nobody wants their kind around makes me want to shoot all of them. This is my boy's time, and what would have been his in-laws' time to mourn. I want to spit in their face for having no respect and being here. But that would just give them what they want, a show. None of them on that wagon were worth their salt to my late Toby. As they stood to climb from the horses and the sheriff's Murphy wagon, she stood with the rifle raised and grimaced. The scoundrels were in such a hurry to get poor Ruby in the ground. If I didn't know better, I'd swear they were hiding something. They have no decency. It's 3 days to grieve on a wake. Evening, Mary. Sheriff Johnson nodded as Alistair Gordon locked his black eyes on Mary and smiled. The kid always gave Mary a bad feeling, and tonight he had the smile of a rattlesnake on his countenance. His demeanor, the half-lowered head, the narrowed, lifeless black eyes, the wicked grin, all held the world in bitter contempt. Jesse Gordon, the lumber boss and father to the cruel son, leaned in from his front seat of the wagon and greeted Mary as well. Evening, Mary. He lowered his head, but kept his brown eyes fixed on Mary and her rifle. We are truly sorry for you and the St. Clair's loss. Ruby was a gem. Evening. Mary saw a slight turn of the right side of Alistair's lip. The son of a bitch had the audacity to smirk at a murdered girl. The boy was an absolute ass. Ignoring the swine's unremorseful gesture, she replied kindly, How can I assist you? Sheriff Johnson jumped off the wagon. He unfurled the back to prepare to move something. He turned back, took off his black cowboy hat, and lowered his head solemnly toward Mary. It's been 3 days, Mary. It's time to put her to rest. It's the Christian thing to do. Mr. Gordon wants. Mr. Gordon, you can take your gesture and shove it. You won't be paying for the funeral. Now, go away. No one on Cauldron Mountain will ever take your blood money. And as Mary said the words, men and women came from out of Mary's cabin and from the back of the house to gather. Herman St. Clair walked up towering over the sheriff and stared down with tired, reddened eyes. With a growl of indignation, I think you heard Mary Forge clear enough. I don't want nothing to do with your charity. Since you Gordons have come to Pearl Ridge, you've been nothing but poison. Leave! Jesse Gordon started to say something, then stopped. Mary figured Gordon had sized up the situation and realized anything he might say could bring out the worst in the grieving father. So, he said the only words he could in the moment. We will be leaving, Mr. St. Clair. Again, my apologies and condolences. Sheriff Johnson added as he climbed on the wagon. 3rd day is tomorrow. The law. Law? This is Cauldron Mountain, sir. I don't know how you bury bodies in Pearl Ridge, but we honor our loved ones. Mary had almost burst into angry tears. Resolving herself not to cry, she thought of shooting the degenerate and the whole lot of them, then cooled her head and thought better of it. Dad didn't need his mother hanged for killing a low-life sheriff who was due for a reckoning. Mary took in a deep, controlled breath. She seethed, controlling her temper. We know the law better than you, sir. She'll be buried in accordance with our religious customs. Now, buzz off, vulture. Sheriff Johnson winced as both Jesse, the 2 men on horseback, and Alistair Gordon smirked at the insult. Then, without looking or saying goodbye to anyone, he shook the reins of his horse team and headed back down to Pearl Ridge. Mary and everyone breathed a sigh of relief as they headed off. But Mary knew, as she'd known they'd ride out today, there would be trouble brewing for slighting the Gordons. Those men don't take kindly to being insulted. We'll have to keep everyone ready. Maybe someone runs them out of Pearl Ridge one day. But until they do, no one will ever be safe. Since he had carried her down the mountain, Thaddeus Forge had not left Ruby's side, with the exception of when the women prepared her body. Even then, like a lost child, he had sat outside the door. For 3 days, he had sat there watching her wither like a plucked rose. For 3 days, he held her lifeless hand heaving and sobbing. For 3 days, he said nothing, ate nothing, and drank nothing. There's no point in living anymore. My love, my life, and my bride is dead. Let me go with her too. It was dark in the room, what would have been Ruby and Thad's room, where they lay Ruby in her coffin. The whole room smelled of her life, lavender from the fields where they played, sassafras from the trees they climbed, and magnolia under the tree where they had their first kiss. All of it had enticed and made him smile, but now beneath all of it, she carried a new sulphureous scent. It was the smell of earth and decay. It was the morbid scent of corruption, and it was the scent of finality, death. With this new scent, there would be no more runs through the lavender. There would be no more climbs into the boughs of the sassafras. And as he hit his bruised legs with his fist, wailing angrily, there would be no more kisses under the magnolia. He lay next to her by the coffin. He held her hand and dreamed the living dreams that no mortal man dared to dream with his life and his bride, Ruby St. Clair. He spoke to her, pleading to God for her to come back. He knew all too well the futility of his words. God had often been a vacant landlord in his life. God, we were to be married. She was to be my blushing Ruby as we stood before your works of nature atop Cauldron Mountain. Bring her back to me, Lord, and I'll do thy bidding, whatever it may be. Let me have her at my side again. Thaddeus gripped Ruby's hand tighter, hearing her knuckles crack. We were to start a family and build a church for you. This has to account for something, God. After 3 days, sitting in the darkness with her porcelain hand, Thaddeus raged in angst and in hellish anguish for the Ruby that was no more. She was no longer his. She would be the bride of the worm and the maggot now. All his pleas were rendered. No more useless words were said to the God that never answered, to the God that sat on his hands while Ruby had her throat cut by the murderer who had gotten away, to the God who had presided over and not lay one finger, one fallen tree or rock to kill the man that cut Ruby's soft white throat. It was the third night, and no word from him who had created the stars. Not one word of condolence from he that created the universe. No tears shed, nor a gentle hand given from he that had raised his beloved Jesus and resurrected Lazarus. Even God had abandoned and forsaken Ruby, his child, who had given her life to him time and again, the loving child of God, who would not ever think of violence as a way to solve anything, had been cut down like the rose by violence. Moonlight flooded the room, illuminating the body of Ruby St. Clair. In his madness, Thaddeus quoted another lover, Edgar Allan Poe, who had tragically lost his bride and certainly went mad as well for a time. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams. of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. And so, all the night tide, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life, and my bride. In her sepulcher, there by the sea. In her tomb, by the sounding sea. And in quoting Poe, a realization dawned on the sweat-profuse brow of the maddened and raging Thaddeus Forge. His heart began to beat loudly and furiously as he raised a closed fist with a single index finger and seethed upwards to the heavens and the silver moon. The tomb! The final journey! The rotting grave! She can't go to ground, God! Do you hear me, Lord, on high? Ruby will not be a bride of your detestable maggot and loathsome conqueror worm. She can't, damn it, she can't. God, do you hear me? I will never allow such desecration of one so pure. Your blasphemy and covetous jealousy of our love will not stand ever. Mary Forge heard her son's screams. She saw everyone in the cabin had as well. Most scoffed it off, as expected, with all her precious boy had lost. All expected he'd lose his mind at some point with her horrific rape and death. But no one expected what happened next. Maybe it was the whir, chattering, and buzzing of the once again swarming locust. Maybe it was the shattering of the window in Thad's room that did it. Most likely, it was both. But whatever had caused Mary to run toward the room, she knew something ominous was afoot, and she needed to find out what. Herman St. Clair and all the mourners followed in pursuit as well. The first thing that shocked Mary was the door. Thaddeus had locked it. Knocking, Mary called out, "Thad, open the door. We heard something break." There was no response. Herman St. Clair tried the knob and knocked angrily. "Open the door, or we'll have to break it down." Again, there was no answer, only the increasing drone of the red locust. Mary put her hand to her mouth, dismayed. She looked on Herman and several of the men, perplexed of what to do. She tried again to get Thad to answer. Everyone by this point pleaded with Thaddeus Forge to open the door. And with each plea and each order, there was silence in return. "Mary, I have no choice. He's not answering." Herman and the men looked on Mary. With her eyes wide and dazed, she nodded for them to proceed. Herman launched a heavy shoulder, but the door didn't budge. Two more men joined in, and the door rattled slightly and jarred the frame. The burly men and their cordwood muscles slammed in unison, not once but two more times, knocking the door off its hinges. Pushing the oaken door aside, everyone peered into the darkness. Mary lifted a lantern to view Thad's room. As her eyes adjusted to the viewing place, she saw the lavender, the sassafras, and magnolia were in disarray on the hardwood floor. The coffin was tossed on its side. Ruby's body was nowhere to be seen, and Thad was gone. Henry St. Clair, Herman's brother, pointed with his thin, wraith-like hand as the night wind tossed his thin, balding hair. "Look, he broke his own window for some foolish reason." Herman fell to the ground, groaning in despair. "He's took her somewhere. That maniac son of yours took my dead daughter somewhere." Crying, Mary tried to explain in a pleading wail. "He's touched from her loss. I know that, Mary Forge, but it still don't make what Thad's done now right." Herman stood with his kin, and all headed out with lanterns, guns, and torches into the night. Pearl Ridge, Georgia, Lake Lanier, near Cauldron Mountain, August 25th, 1922, just after midnight. To his surprise, Thad realized he had made it to moonlit Lake Lanier. He knew it the moment he saw the molten silver shimmer of the moon on its waters. He had stumbled on it accidentally, realizing 10 minutes into his climb from the window that he had no way to judge the direction or distance in the dark. But by divine or deviled providence, he had come to believe with the moon and its radiant glow, he could maneuver the treacherous cliff sides and crags to reach the lake. But with everyone looking for him and Ruby, most experienced hunters and trackers, Thad figured his efforts to keep his dead love incorruptible and eternal might be a fool's errand as he staggered through moonlit forest. But over an hour into his journey, he made out the heavenly waters. As he spilled into a shadowed gully bordering the western end of the pines surrounding the lake, he had been rewarded for his tenacity and dedication to the waxen, fly-covered corpse. He strolled the moonlit shores carrying his precious bundle. Over and over again, he sang her song. The same song he had crooned to her when he brought her down from Devil's Cavern. Then once he found the spot that they had since children plunged into from the outcropping rock. He walked, then waded with Ruby St. Clair into the freezing, moonlit waters, mesmerized by the glow of the silver moon, dazzled by the endless processions of stars reflected across the universe. Thaddeus Forge paused and laid down his life and his bride into those waters. She floated and glided as an angel beneath the star-gemmed heavens. She was radiant and eternal, resting peacefully, resting forever beneath the vastness of the universe. Thad lowered his head and felt the stinging, icy waters numbing, chilling, and maybe killing him. He didn't care if he died right there in those lonesome silvery waves. I had a dream, beloved Ruby St. Clair. You were my dream. Thad's words were solemn as he rubbed his hands through her silver curls that glint as ghostly eyes under the moon. He spoke lovingly, softly, and with a broken heart to his radiant fallen angel, cast to earth horrifically as another angel eons and eons ago. Swaying with the waters on that haunted lake where many a traveler had disappeared. He quoted Clark Ashton Smith as the gentle wind tossed his damp hair, crying, breaking at times while reciting the dark sorcerer of linguistic black magic's words. He continued to gaze on his silvered fallen angel, Ruby St. Clair. Lost from those archangelic thrones that star, fadeless and fixed, heaven's light of azure bliss, forbanned of all his splendor and depressed beyond the birth of the first sun, and lower than the last star's decline, I still endure. Abased, majestic, fallen, beautiful, and unregretful in the doubted dark. Throneless, that greatens chaos ward, albeit from chanting stars that throng the nave of night. Lost echoes wander here, and of his praise, with ringing moons for cymbals dinned afar, and shouted from the flaming mouths of suns. That was lovely, Thaddeus Forge. A reptilian voice hissed to him from the shadows of the shoreline. It was the all-too-familiar voice from the cave, the same one who had lit the cave ablaze and helped Thad locate Ruby's grave. What do you want? Thad continued to stare at Ruby, not caring to look in the direction of the voice. Thaddeus became surprised by the voice's candor. He prayed it wasn't a ruse by this shadowy thing.
Honestly, I'm here for you. I'm here to pay my condolences to that beautiful girl that you are letting drift away under all this majestic splendor.
I'm saving her from the worms and maggots. I can't let them eat her. He didn't know why he was explaining himself to this dark stranger who continued to stay hidden in night.
I totally can understand your dilemma. That natural order he imposes but never follows is a bit of a pain. Besides, why do people have to die?
The serpent voice emphasized with an echoing voice.
I say, live and let live forever.
She didn't have to die, as you well know. Thad growled bitterly in disgust. You probably watched too and let it happen.
I take issue with your accusation, Thaddeus Forge. I don't work that way.
The serpent hissed back with menace.
People always have free will. That's not my rule, but again, his.
You keep saying he and his. Who is this person you keep accusing of terrible deeds yourself? Thad glanced back to try and see the voice. There was nothing behind him but swaying pines and moonlit shoreline. Then from a towering hemlock, the voice answered with a tone of boredom.
Oh, the he was the one you just recited in that excellent poem. The oppressed tyrant who crushed my rebellion of his word. The heartless, negligent, and unbending despot that I will one day usurp and send to his own crashing fall.
The stranger's voice uttering those succinct words, the mysterious shadow, who had always shadowed Thaddeus in one form or another, bit like a viper. Thaddeus winced, feeling the realization of who the stranger claimed to be. And as the vastness of Lake Lanier continued to engulf him and prepared to receive his ruby eternally beneath its waters, Thaddeus Forge felt the spine-tingling chill that came with such knowledge. His body reacted, and he nearly retched to the pervading cold of all too familiar fear. He was truly colder now than he had ever been in his life. It was the bone-setting chill of knowing he faced a malignant, eternal evil that froze Thad to his very core and paralyzed him with shock to move. For with truth had indeed come wisdom, as the Bible had mentioned in Revelations of he that would rise and crush the world in the end days. He that would be guided by Satan himself to end the reign of man and wreck all of civilization. Now it had been unabashedly and brazening announced for a reason. Honestly, I'm here for you. What does he mean by that? Why am I so important to him?
There's plenty of time for the answers to your question, my dear Thaddeus. Lord knows, unintended, that our legion will have such sights for you to see and feel in your reign with us.
Satan, if that was even this being's true name, had spoken the truth and been forthcoming between them, and once again having the knowledge or even the possibility that such an ageless, evil abomination was at his bidding, terrified the once godly, devout youth. The mangled Christian faith that lingered seared away to ash by the horrors of Ruby's horrific death. Ruby the angelic, Ruby the forgotten, Ruby who had fallen but endured only to be raped and murdered. So whilst Thad felt his very spine frozen further and ice deeper than even the frigid waters of the Arctic. He burned for vengeance. As his very soul turned glacial now, knowing who the voice was, his anger boiled to square that which had been done to his beloved and taken from him senselessly. Thaddeus Forge would have his rubies murderers pound of flesh, and he tortured the killer slow and painfully, eating him one piece at a time as the swine watched.
You are a dark one, my son, aren't you?
The serpent laughed and laughed as Cauldron Mountain shook with earthquake ferocity. Now, the possibility had manifested itself in the most terrible and insane of times for Thaddeus Forge, especially after his outrage and protest against God. But who was he to garner an audience with the most evilest of beings in any plane of existence? What made Thad so important to the devil? How had this omnipotent and ageless deity of man's ruin become his resource, his guide, his scholar, and answered his prayers, not God? Would this newfound alliance gain Thaddeus Forge leverage to square the slights against him and Ruby? Here was true power. Here was literally hell on earth. Satan was before Thaddeus Forge to help him, to guide him, and to condole that which had been robbed him in heartless rape and murder. What was that feeling as he immersed himself in the darkness of the shimmering lake, resting his beloved in a watery grave, rock by rock, to sink her lifeless form? As he placed the last stones to sink beloved Ruby amongst the swimming, shadowed creatures in the depths of Lake Lanier, what were his thoughts? Did he still carry the infernal hate for what had been done to her as he watched the last moonlit glimmer on her curls? What words did he say to capture the moment that Thad would embrace the fires of hell itself to avenge her murder? His dark thoughts were these: I will endure to avenge and wreak havoc on all who protected this heartless murderer of my bride, Ruby St. Clair. Unregretful, undaunted, and unrepentant, unto Satan himself I shall crush all of them that protected this swine of a man, and all he transgressed against my Ruby. But most of all, as my new God and all his legions will attest, I will break his will first. Then I will break his hope as I break every piece left of him that is human. And when I am done, when all their joy, all their happiness, and all their love is ash, then I will eat them piece by piece as they watch. And my ridding their very existence by all means at my leisure will not end with this killer. The same will hold true for their entire family lineage, their lovers, and any descendants who survive. I will open the very gates of all the known hells. I break down the very doors of reality throughout the countless universes of the cosmos to exact my revenge. I will endure to see that all the Ruby St. Clairs in every conceivable form of existence will have their vengeance. I will never be like God, the absent landlord, my rebuked king, no longer my savior. I have shucked the binding yokes of his religion and be a savior unto my own. Thine own spiritual enlightenment, learn all, explore the forbidden, and do as thou wilt, has broken the chains of his pious and useless dogmatic doctrine that bound me. Unrepentant, I am free the burden of remorse, morality, and most certainly guilt for what I'm about to unleash on Pearl Ridge and the world. So, help me, my dark lord. Thad, what the hell are you doing in the water? Do you want to catch your death of cold? Herman St. Clair bellowed as he raised his lamp on Thad. Then he asked the next all-important question as he watched Thad glance back and smile devilishly before looking up to the stars. Thank you for listening.
Have a great night.